Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we don't just summarize information, we really unpack the source material to give you the knowledge you need, thoroughly and quickly. And today, our mission is, well, it's maybe one of the most relevant deep dives we've ever done for really anyone with a smartphone.
Yeah.
We're looking at what we're calling the shortcut paradox. On one hand, you have all this technology from a simple Maps app to complex generative AI that gives us incredible efficiency. We all want to learn and get things done faster. But what's the hidden cost? Are these tools that are designed to make us smarter actually, maybe, eroding the very skills we need to handle all that information they give us?
That is the central question, isn't it? And it's at the heart of all the sources we're looking at today. If you look back at history, human thinking has always been shaped by our technology. When the printing press arrived, people, scholars, worried it would destroy our memory because you didn't have to memorize entire texts anymore. And now we're facing a shift that's much faster and I think much more profound. It's hitting our attention spans, our ability to reason, even how we think about our own thinking.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we've got a really powerful mix of sources. We're talking psychological assessments, hard data from eye-tracking studies, neurological research, and even educational frameworks. We're going to start with something small, like delegating navigation to your GPS, and then scale all the way up to delegating actual creative thought to large language models.
And the goal here is to figure out if we're actually achieving what some people call intelligence augmentation, making ourselves smarter, or if we're just falling into a kind of cognitive laziness. The good news is the data suggests the outcome isn't set in stone. It really depends on how we choose to use these tools. Passively, we pay a price. Mindfully, we can actually enhance our abilities.
Okay, so let's unpack that, starting with an example that everyone knows, GPS. We all use it. We outsource the mental work of figuring out a route. But what is that doing to our internal map, in the long run?
It's the perfect place to start because spatial cognition is such a fundamental human skill. And the research here gives us a perfect blueprint for what happens when we offload that kind of complex mental work.
So let's get into the specifics of this one study. It involved 108 people, and the researchers, they didn't just ask them questions. They used eye tracking to objectively measure what was going on.
Right. They use scales to measure things like GPS dependency, even impulsivity, but the eye tracking, that's the hard data. They had participants do a couple of tasks. One was a basic mental rotation task.
But the other one, the target finding task, was the really interesting one.
Yes, the target finding, or TF task. It was very cleverly designed.
So how did it work? How did it test that internal map?
Well, participants would see a 3D street-level view of a scene, kind of like what you see on Google Street View, with a target building.
Okay.
Then they were shown a top-down 2D map of that same area, but it was rotated. And they had to find that same target building on the 2D map.
So you have to mentally connect the 3D view to the 2D map and reorient the whole thing in your head.
Exactly. It's a direct measure of your ability to build that internal sense of direction from just visual information.
And the core conclusion for people who are really dependent on their GPS.
It was pretty stark. High GPS dependency was directly linked to impaired spatial cognition.
So they were just worse at it.
They were. But here's a really important nuance. The dependency didn't really affect their self-reported sense of direction. They didn't feel like they were worse at navigating.
Interesting.
The impairment was in the underlying processing. When they were forced to do it themselves, their brains were just less efficient.
So it's not about confidence. It's about the raw mental effort involved. They get there eventually, but their brain is just having to work way, way harder.
Precisely. And we can see that objectively in the eye tracking data, specifically in something called fixations.
A fixation is just when your eye stops and focuses on something, right?
Right. And when a task is hard or when your brain is struggling to process the information, you get more fixations. The eyes stopped more often, for longer. It's a sign of a less efficient, more fragmented thought process.
So how strong was that link? Let's break down the numbers a bit.
So across the whole group, all 108 people, there was a positive correlation between their GPS dependency score and the number of fixations. Their RAR value was about 0.202.
Which is statistically significant, but, not a massive link.
Not massive across the board, no. But when you start to look at the subgroups, that's where this signal gets really, really loud.
Okay, so where did it pop?
Well, for one, in the city subgroup. For people navigating a dense urban environment, the correlation jumped to 0.254.
Which makes sense. A city is more complex, so if you've outsourced that thinking, the deficit is going to show up more.
It's a bigger cognitive debt. But the really dramatic finding was in another subgroup.
Which one was that?
It was the group that reported low internet gaming time, so less than 2 hours a week. For that group, the correlation between GPS dependency and fixations it spiked. The R value was 0.459.
Wow. That's more than double the correlation of the overall group.
It's a very strong, very robust link.
So what does that tell us? Does gaming create some kind of cognitive shield?
It suggests that, yeah, if you're already doing other complex spatial tasks, like in certain video games where you're mapping 3D environments or making quick spatial decisions, you're constantly training those mental muscles. You have a buffer.
But if you don't have that?
If you don't have that pre-existing practice, the negative effect of GPS dependency is just far, far more profound. The technology finds the weak spot.
So we know their brains are struggling.
Yeah.
And they even found evidence of what they were struggling with, right? Down to the specific buildings they were looking at.
Yes. The high dependence group, the top 30%, had significantly more fixations on the key landmarks, on the original target building and on the main indicative building in the test area.
So they're just staring at the key cues over and over again. It's like they can't hold the whole map in their head, so they have to keep rereading the anchor points.
That's the critical insight. It shows that less efficient, more resource-intensive mode of thinking, their cognitive system has been, a little bit dulled by delegation, and it has to work harder and slower when the tool is taken away.
And the researchers actually traced this dependency back to a specific personality trait.
He did. Impulsivity.
How does that connect?
Well, they found that GPS dependency actually mediated the effect of impulsivity on the number of fixations.
Okay, what does that mean in simple terms?
It means that impulsivity, that tendency to just choose the fastest, easiest path, is what fuels the decision to rely on GPS so much in the first place.
Oh, okay.
That dependency then becomes the thing that actually leads to the degraded cognitive performance later on.
So the technology is an enabler. If you're already inclined to take the mental shortcut, GPS lets you do it. But taking that shortcut over and over actually makes the underlying cognitive machinery weaker.
It's a feedback loop. Impulsivity leads to dependency. Dependency leads to inefficiency. And this little example is our blueprint for everything that follows. If a simple navigation app can do this to spatial reasoning, what happens with a tool that can write your emails or your essays?
And that is the perfect transition. If GPS affects how we navigate physical space, generative AI affects how we navigate the world of thought. We're moving from spatial offloading to full-on cognitive offloading.
And the consequences appear to be much broader, hitting things like our psychological well-being and our ability to self-regulate. The research on Gen AI suggests that this convenience, this outsourcing of thought, it comes with a pretty steep price.
So let's talk about that big study on 401 university students. They were looking at AI use, digital burnout, and executive functioning deficits. And we're talking about the core machinery of the brain here, right? Our internal CEO.
That's right. Planning, attention, switching between tasks. The first thing they did was establish a baseline, and they found a very strong link. The higher the digital burnout, the greater the executive functioning difficulties.
But the truly eye-opening part was the comparison between the AI users and the non-users. We have to talk about those effect sizes.
We do. They split the students into 332 AI users and 69 non-users. And the AI users reported significantly higher burnout and way more EF deficits compared to the non-users.
And the difference wasn't small.
It was not small at all.
Yeah.
The sources use a metric called Cohen's d to describe the size of the difference. A Cohen's d of 0.8 is considered a large effect.
And what was it here?
It was over 1.80.
That's massive.
It's huge. It means the difference in burnout and cognitive struggles between the average AI user in this study and the average non-user is just profound. The two groups barely overlap.
That is genuinely staggering.
Yeah.
So the group that's using the tool that's supposed to make their work easier is actually experiencing way more psychological strain and struggling more with basic cognitive control. That seems to completely fly in the face of what the technology promises.
It does. And it raises that crucial question of causation versus correlation. You have to ask. Maybe the students who were already burned out, already struggling, were the ones who turned to AI for help in the first place.
A very fair point. We have to address that.
And while the study can't prove absolute cause and effect, it does offer a clue. They found that the perceived usefulness of the AI also predicted greater EF difficulties.
So the more helpful they thought the AI was,
the more helpful they believed it to be, the deeper their reliance, the more likely they were to report these executive function problems. It points back to the same pattern as the GPS study. The immediate benefit fosters a reliance that seems to weaken the internal mechanisms over time. The convenience is a trap.
The reliance creates the dependency, which then contributes to the burnout. So offloading the work doesn't actually free up your mental space. It just creates a kind of passive reliance that makes you less capable when the machine isn't there.
That is the definition of cognitive offloading, and we now have objective neurological evidence of the cost of doing this.
Okay, let's get into that EEG study on essay writing. Where did they actually see the brain switch off?
They monitored people writing essays, some with help from ChatGPT, and the finding was that the AI-supported group showed significantly reduced brain activity in the very regions you need for memory, reasoning, and attentional control.
What did that look like specifically?
Specifically, they saw diminished alpha and beta connectivity.
Okay, for those of us who aren't neurologists, what does that mean? What are alpha and beta waves?
Think of them as different gears for your brain. Beta waves are for active, focused problem solving. Alpha waves are more for that relaxed but focused state of synthesis and reflection, deep thought.
And when they use the LLM?
They saw a reduction in both. The brain wasn't doing the hard focused work, and it wasn't doing the deep reflective work either. And on top of that, they found a clear underactivation of the prefrontal regions.
The internal CEO.
The internal CEO just checked out. The brain physically disengaged from the hard parts of the task.
And there was a psychological consequence to that too, right?
An immediate one. That group also reported the lowest sense of ownership over what they wrote. Which makes sense. If the machine does the thinking, you feel less connected to the result, which just deepens that cycle of cognitive debt.
And the scariest part, I think, was the qualitative data. The fact that users don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're just checking or just researching.
That's the real danger of this cognitive debt. It's slippery. You slip into this passive mode where you think you're still in charge, but you've actually handed over all the difficult parts.
There was that one quote from a participant.
Yes, it summed it up perfectly. They said something like, "The AI output sounds more professional than how I'd say it, so I felt like the AI was probably doing it better than I would."
And that's it right there. The AI is superior, so I don't need to struggle. That is the accumulation of cognitive debt in real time.
It's this illusion of engagement. You stop questioning, you stop struggling productively, and ultimately, you stop learning.
Okay, so this all feels pretty bleak. The GPS data, the burnout, the brain scans. It makes you wonder if technology is just inherently bad for us. But the research suggests it's not the tool itself, it's the way we're using it.
Exactly. The problem isn't the technology, it's the philosophy behind it. And to find a better path, we have to look at the two competing historical visions for what smart machines are for.
The two visions of AI.
Right. On one hand, you have the dominant vision, what we call artificial intelligence, or AI. That term came from the Dartmouth workshop back in 1955, and that vision was all about replacement, building machines that could think like humans, or even instead of humans.
But there was another idea that came just a few years later.
Yes, 5 years later, a computer scientist named J.C.R. Licklider proposed a different goal, intelligence augmentation, or IA.
So not artificial, but augmented.
Exactly. Licklider's vision wasn't about building machines that think like us. It was about designing systems for human-computer symbiosis, machines designed to help humans think better.
It's a really subtle but incredibly important distinction in the intention. AI is a replacement, IA is a tool.
It's the ultimate tool. You know, Steve Jobs had that great metaphor. He called the computer a bicycle for our minds.
Right.
His point was that a bicycle doesn't replace the human, it just makes the human vastly more efficient. It amplifies our innate capability. That's the IA philosophy. We're designing the bicycle, not trying to build a robot that can run for us.
So if we're going with that IA framework, we have to be really clear about the division of labor. What do we give to the machine, and what must the human always keep?
It has to be about complementary strengths. The machine is brilliant at data-heavy, repetitive tasks, sifting through massive data sets, running complex calculations without getting tired. That's the machine's job.
The data crunching.
The tireless data crunching. And that frees up the human to focus on the higher value activities. Things like strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, ethical reasoning, and most importantly, applying context, wisdom, and final judgment.
And we have real-world examples that prove this collaborative model is just flat out better than a replacement model. Chess is the classic one.
It is. When Deep Blue beat Kasparov in '97, a lot of people thought, well, that's it for humans in chess.
Game over.
Game over. But what happened next was fascinating. We saw the rise of what's called freestyle chess, where human-computer teams compete, and these teams consistently beat both the best human players alone and the best computer engines alone.
So the combination is better than either part on its own.
The synergy is superior. The human provides the strategic intuition, the creativity, and the machine provides the brute force calculation. It's a perfect partnership.
And you see this same model working in professional fields too, like insurance.
Insurance underwriting is a perfect example. You can use an algorithm to automate the underwriting for simple, standard risks, like a basic auto policy. The data is huge, and the models are reliable.
That's the automation piece.
Right, it frees up the human underwriters. But when you have to evaluate a really complex or novel risk like insuring a new kind of business that has no historical data, the algorithm breaks down.
Because it has nothing to learn from.
Exactly. And that's where the human underwriter, who is now freed up from all that routine work, can step in and apply common sense, judgment, and nuance that the machine just doesn't have.
And this framework is also critical for catching bias, right?
Yeah.
Because the algorithms are trained on human data, they can pick up our flaws.
They absolutely can. And this is the real double-edged sword of AI and judgment. On one hand, an algorithm can remove certain simple human errors. There were studies showing judges were less likely to grant parole right before lunch.
Seriously, because they were hungry.
It seems so. So an algorithm can smooth out those kinds of irrelevant human biases. That's a good thing.
But the data itself can be biased.
And if the data is biased, the machine will perfectly and efficiently amplify that bias. A famous recidivism risk model was found to be twice as likely to falsely flag Black defendants as high risk compared to white defendants. Wow.
It was just reflecting a bias that was already in the historical data, but it scaled it up and hid it inside this black box that felt objective.
So the human in the loop isn't just a user. They have to be a critical, ethical check on the machine's output.
Absolutely. That specific case led to a court ruling that said these risk scores could not be the only factor in sentencing. They have to be one input for a human judge to consider. It's freestyle chess, but for the justice system. The machine calculates, the human decides.
Okay, so we have our philosophy, intelligence augmentation. The goal is symbiosis, not replacement. So how do we actually do that? How do we interact with something like Gen AI in a way that keeps us in that augmentation lane and avoids the cognitive debt trap? The research seems to point to one key idea: structure.
Intentional design is the antidote to passive consumption. And the evidence for this comes from a great experiment that tested a technique called structured prompting.
So they took a group of people and had them work on a complex reasoning task, something like analyzing the pros and cons of democracy. Right. And one group was just given the AI and told to go for it. The other group was explicitly trained in this structured prompting method.
And the results?
The guided group, the one that used structured prompts, had much, much better outcomes. Their final arguments were stronger, more well-reasoned. They reported feeling more cognitively engaged themselves. And critically, they ended up relying less on the raw AI output.
So the tool was there, but the human's thinking actually improved. How does that work? What's the mechanism that makes structured prompting what did the sources call it? A metacognitive scaffold.
That scaffold basically forces you to use your slow, deliberate System 2 thinking before you just accept what the AI gives you. It stops you from just typing, "Write me an essay on democracy."
Could you give me a practical example? What would that actually look like?
Sure. So an unguided user just asks for the essay. A guided user following a structured protocol might do it in steps. Step 1. First, I'm going to generate 3 non-obvious hypotheses about democracy's biggest weakness on my own. Step 2. Now, I'll use the AI as a research assistant to find evidence supporting one of those and a counterargument for another one. Step 3. Finally, I'll synthesize everything using my own judgment.
I see. So the human is always the one defining the problem, creating the intellectual challenge, and doing the final integration. The AI is just a tool, a very powerful research librarian, not the author.
Exactly. It prevents what the researchers call epistemic surrender, just giving up your responsibility for the reasoning process. And here's the really interesting part. Because the guided group was forced to think harder, they actually reported that the task was more difficult.
And that's the counterintuitive sign of success. Higher difficulty means more engagement.
It's a productive struggle. And you can see that difference clearly when the researchers grouped the participants based on their cognitive profiles.
Right. They used a latent class analysis. Let's break down those 2 profiles. Who was the most vulnerable to just offloading the work?
They identified two clear classes. Class 0 were the AI-dependent thinkers. This was the larger group. And they were defined by high offloading, low reflective engagement, and, just an average sense of difficulty.
And what were their characteristics?
They were more likely to be younger and have lower educational qualifications. And crucially, they just had this strong implicit trust that the AI's output would be better, more professional than their own.
So they surrendered their epistemic responsibility. What about the other group?
That was class 1, the reflective thinkers. This group showed low offloading, high reflective engagement, and a higher perceived sense of difficulty. They knew they were working harder, and this group was more likely to be older and hold postgraduate degrees.
So education and maybe age seem to be the biggest protective factors against this kind of passive offloading.
It was the strongest predictor by far, not geography. They had participants from the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and it was the same pattern. It was educational background. Higher attainment correlated directly with more reflective engagement.
Which really underscores the educational mandate here. The ability to structure your thinking in partnership with an AI isn't something we're born with. It's a skill that has to be taught. Otherwise, you risk making existing educational divides even wider.
Absolutely. The technology could widen the gap between those who use it to think better and those who let it think for them.
And if we pull the lens back even further, this all points to a bigger shift. The skills we need are changing so fast that we might need to completely redefine what it means to be literate in the 21st century.
That's right. It's not just about reading and writing anymore. Historically, literacy was reading, writing, arithmetic. Then came media literacy learning to critically analyze images, TV, digital content. But we're facing something new now.
The theorist Henry Giroux had a powerful idea about this.
He did. He said, the new illiteracy is about not knowing how to read the world. And in our algorithmic, data-saturated world, that means you need two new forms of understanding.
Let's start with the first one. Data literacy. What does that mean in practice?
Data literacy is the ability to make sense of the data-driven environment around us. It's about understanding how data is collected, what it represents, and how it's used to make predictions. If you can't question the source of the data or the methods used, you are, in a functional sense, illiterate in this new world.
And the second one is maybe even more important for our daily lives, algorithmic literacy. This gets at those black box systems that curate so much of what we see.
Yes, this is essential. It's about understanding the processes that decide what news you see, what search results come up first. It means being aware of selection biases, of how algorithms can create filter bubbles or amplify misinformation because of biases in their training data. Without it, you're just the passive consumer of a reality that's been curated for you by unseen forces.
Which brings us back to the challenge for educators and leaders. If we know AI is amazing at tasks with one right answer convergent thinking, what should the human focus on? Where do we draw the line?
The guidance from these educational frameworks is very clear. AI should enhance, not substitute, core human skills. That means AI should never be the one completing creative thinking tasks, complex analytical reasoning, or adaptive leadership scenarios. Those have to remain human domains.
And there's a real danger in delegating creative thinking, right? It's not just about getting a slightly less original essay.
The danger is that it stifles divergent thinking. LLMs are great at convergent thinking, finding the best known solution. But divergent thinking is about exploring, generating multiple new solutions, redefining the problem. Studies show that when people use LLMs for these tasks, they tend to get anchored to the machine's first, very polished answer, and it actually hinders their ability to think divergently.
We risk a kind of intellectual monoculture.
Exactly. So education has to double down on training creative thinking, analytical reasoning, and adaptive leadership. Those are the areas where human originality provides unique value.
And this isn't just a theoretical need. We're already seeing huge real-world skills gaps in specialized fields like healthcare.
That qualitative analysis from Flanders and Belgium is a perfect example. They looked at how ready the healthcare workforce was for AI, and they found that a one-size-fits-all approach to training is doomed to fail.
What were the headline numbers? How big was the gap between interest and readiness?
The interest was huge. Over 85% of health professionals wanted AI courses, but the readiness was incredibly low. Only about 14% felt their current training had prepared them at all.
It's a massive gap.
That's a seven-fold gap. And their motivations were completely different depending on age and profession.
Oh, so?
Younger professionals, under 30, were eager to learn AI to advance their careers, but they were also the most worried about their jobs being replaced. Older professionals, over 50, mostly just wanted AI to reduce their administrative paperwork.
And the professional hierarchy played a big role, especially for nurses.
It did. Doctors felt more prepared and had better access to training. Nurses, despite being on the front lines of using these new systems, reported the lowest familiarity and often lacked the institutional support or funding to get trained.
So the people who will use the tools the most are the least prepared to do so.
That's the conclusion. You can't just roll out one generic AI course. You need tailored, accredited programs for each role that address their specific needs, reducing burden for one group, accelerating skills for another, and providing basic access and support for a third. The new illiteracy shows up as different gaps for different people.
So this deep dive has shown us this incredibly consistent pattern. Whether it's a GPS or an LLM, unguided passive reliance leads to diminished cognitive capacity, to burnout, to this accumulation of cognitive debt. But structured, intentional engagement acts as that scaffold that actually demands and improves our critical thinking.
And that's the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener. The relationship between us and AI is not predetermined. It all comes down to intentional design and mindful use. We have to move past this idea of simple automation and truly embrace the philosophy of intelligence augmentation.
We need to stop asking what the AI can do for us and start being much more deliberate about what we should be doing with it, leveraging our uniquely human capacity for context, wisdom, and ethical judgment.
Exactly. And when we make that shift, the entire conversation changes. We move away from the big, scary question of, will AI surpass humanity? And we start asking a much more productive question, how do we develop a philosophy for living digitally? You know, there's a concept from European philosophy that seems incredibly relevant here. It's called Bildung. It's a bit hard to translate, but it's not about job training or just acquiring technical skills.
What is it about?
At its core, Bildung is about the development of a coherent sense of yourself and your place in the world. It's about character formation, self-cultivation, and maintaining a humanistic view of what it means to be a person.
So it's about developing wisdom, not just skills.
Yes. And in our world today, a building approach to digital literacy wouldn't just be about learning to code or write prompts. It would be a path toward living ethically, creatively, and productively in a world of perpetual technological change, all while holding on to that humanistic core. It's the absolute opposite of epistemic surrender. We know AI is getting better and better at routine work. Some predict it could surpass traditional schools for basic academic learning within a decade. So, the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Given that reality, what are the distinctive, irreplaceable human capabilities that you are going to consciously cultivate and protect? What are the analytical, creative, and adaptive skills that you decide AI should not be doing for you?